Hey, hello, chess friends. Mike Koplitz here from the Royal Rooks of York, Pennsylvania, USA, bringing you another lesson in chess. And I hope my students are having the opportunity to watch these different videos. They're fun to make. They're good for me because I learn, and hopefully you're learning. We're going to take a look at a game that was played. Let me get you the right date. 1990, between Grandmaster Garry Kasparov and Grandmaster Anatoly Karpov. Comes out of a pretty good book. I'll show you the book. As you know, I like to use different games from these books. There's analysis, of course, in the book itself. If you get it, this game is on page 96. And what I like to do is go through the game, but to also add analysis in and thoughts, especially for students of the games, because there's a lot of information that just isn't listed. And that's okay. This game is to illustrate the center. And we all know what the center is. I'll get my cursor out here. This is the center. And we fight for the center. And you probably already know this, but again, for some of my younger students that are watching, you'll note that when you put a piece like a queen or a knight, a bishop, a rook, whatever in the center, wow, they could strike pretty well across the board. The center is important, especially at the beginning of the game. There's different strategies that have to do with the center, and we'll probably go through some of those as we go through it. So first, we're going to take a look at the white having a superior center. And I mentioned the game. It's a world championship game. So let me get some moves on the board and make sure the board is actually working. That's always the fun part. There we go. The board is now working. Sometimes wonder why it takes as long as it does to react, but I can't go faster than the board. That would be a very bad idea. This is called the Ruy Lopez. I used to play this a lot in the 70s. Probably everyone did. Bobby Fischer really liked it. These are all basic moves. You can look them up in any book. And here I need to look up more because it's not registering the castle. Why is it not recognizing the castle? So we'll just force it to do that. I like using the aquarium software. I don't know why the driver isn't picking these things up quicker. And I'm also using a DGT board. I like using the DGT board, especially when it works. Much better. It's good to have a feel for the pieces. I mean, I like reading the books and I look at the diagrams, but I really start to understand things better when I actually am touching pieces. It's a tactile thing. I guess some of these you kids now that use video programs and computers might disagree with that, but that's okay. This is the way I learned. We call it old school, I guess. Now, this is the basic line. I've have played this many times before. Some of you may have also played it. Black's got to start making some decisions. He's got a backward pawn sitting right here. Knight's en prise, it's unprotected. White's going to move d4 and attack in the center. So Black's got some decisions to make. And Karpov decided this is the move that he liked. Nothing wrong with that move. In fact, the annotators gave it an exclamation point saying this was a great move. D4. And white attacks in the center. This is normal for Ruy Lopez. Very, very normal. Black goes E8. And the commentators of this book are giving these exclamation points. Well, Karpov was known as a defensive player, a very, very good one, obviously. He was world champion. Kasparov, he is an attacking player, which I like being an attacking player, so you can see who I like. And then bishop to F8. So we're seeing this build up in the center. It's kind of interesting. Rooks are in on the E file. Of course, the problem for white in the Ruy Lopez is he's still got his queen bishop hanging in the back rank. He's got to get that thing developed here soon. And what he does here is he goes to A4. The center is just being held right now. And I should take note here a little bit of things here. Some of you might be inclined to push this pawn forward, this one on D4. That would lock the center. And you don't want the center locked yet until you decide what you're going to do. So if Kasparov wanted to do a kingside attack, then he would lock the center. Because a winged attack, the best defense is to attack the center. He's not attacking in the center at the moment. He doesn't want to clear it out. He doesn't want to do pawn takes pawn. I don't think he would, because you just open this D file up and he's not ready for that yet. So he's going to do a little attacking on the wing. That's not that unusual. The response is H6, bishop C2, and they did. Now Karpov starts things up. So we're getting pretty close here to the middle game. C takes D4. You'll notice white has a really good center. Very good center. Knight to B4. Notice that little hole opened up, and you can see it on, this would be B4. By moving the rook pawn, the A pawn forward, and then exchanging off the C3, that becomes an outpost for the knight. And it's a pretty nice outpost on the queen side. Well, Kasparov cannot give up his white bishop. That's too valuable to him right now. Because notice this white bishop, guys, it's aiming right at H7. I mean, it's in perfect striking distance when this pawn on E4 moves over to E5. It's just beautifully striking distance. B takes A4, and that's noted as a blunder. And the author says this is the losing move of the game. Now, you and I will probably look at this and say, it's a losing move already. How can that possibly be? The game is, geez, what is the only 15th move of Grandmaster's Championship game? But what it does is it allows this rook now to get involved, attack of the knight, support in the center. And Karpov moves A5. That makes perfect sense. Got to protect the knight. Kind of locks the rook in for the moment. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. Well, Kasparov, he's going to say, well, that's not going to work for me. You can't leave that rook on A4. It's just not doing anything there anymore. He did get the pawn to move, and there must be a good reason for that. And we'll see that later. Of course, the rook on A8 is kind of stuck because it has to protect. I guess I would say getting the pawn to move to A5 is going to weaken it because the black square bishop is sitting here on f8, and it's kind of boxed in. You really can't do much of anything. That's a problem in the Ruy Lopez. Of course, don't forget, white's got the same. Well, his bishop isn't blocked in. I shouldn't say it's blocked in, but it's not exactly going anywhere too quickly. So let's see what happens. Karpov brings the rook to a6. And this knight then comes to h2. I think you're seeing white getting ready to do a king side attack. Now, I didn't preview this game, by the way. I don't do that. I'm playing it through just like you would for the first time. g6. Well, of course, you want to get the bishop to the g7 square and get it doing something. That's a nice diagonal once it gets to it. f3. Now, this gets a double exclamation point, which is interesting. It's more bolstering of the center. That e4 pawn, here it is. He's got to get it protected because this knight's got to get out of the way to let the bishop go. This one. So that's a pretty nice little move there. Queen to d7. Knight to c4. That's where I would move it because that's a semi-outpost. Because if the pawn moves forward, this d pawn from 6 to 5, you just take it. And it has a pretty good outpost. It's also double attacking this pawn. So we'll see what he does about it. Well, Karpov's going to defend it. But notice he defends and attacks at the same time. I keep reminding my students, defend and attack at the same time is a fabulous way to move if you can. The rook then moves to c3. Got to protect the knight. Also, now the rook is looking down at this backward pawn on c7. Much more fun pawn to have than the a5 pawn, no question about that. Bishop to c8. Bishop to e3. King to h7. Now, honestly, I don't know why the king moved. I'll be honest with you. There's no explanation or discussion about it. Let's move it back for a second. Computer saying queen to b8 is the better move. h5 is popping up also. Okay. That's the nice part of Aquarium is we can move back and forth and look at the different lines. The queen goes to c1. Okay, well, we're seeing the attack. It's going to be on that h6 pawn. That's what he's going after. He's not quite there yet, but he's not that far away at the same time. c6. The commentators put a question mark exclamation point because they're not real sure what he's doing. Computer's not that upset by it. The score is pretty much the same. So let's keep going. Knight to g4. I like that move also because it's, again, now you're attacking this h pawn and you can win it if you're careful. Well, instead of exchanging the knights, Karpov moved his knight back. He could have just done knight takes knight. Notice now he's losing big time in position. Let's move it back for a second. Knight takes g4 is the recommended computer move. Well, they didn't have computers in that time that could do that kind of work. Now, the recommended move is bishop h4. See it on the computer? It's coming by. Well, now bishop d2 and a couple things like that. That is not the move Kasparov made. So I'm a little surprised by this move also, but let's see what happens. Bishop takes h6. Kasparov I think he was one of the best. Magnus Carlsen, Karpov, Fischer, probably my three top. So let's see what happens. Bishop takes h6. Knight takes h6. Knight takes h6. And now we see the reason. I'm surprised the computer didn't pick this up. I didn't see it either. Knight takes d6. Nice fork. The queen goes to b6. And Kasparov gets the rook, and therefore the exchange, and a couple of pawns along the way. This is why Kasparov is just so good. He was the best. Queen comes down to take d4. Got to pick up some pawns here. Check. King has to move to h1. Queen to d8. Now that knight's going to fall. So far we're fine. Queen takes e8. Now we're pretty much equal material. 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Interestingly enough. But look at Karpov's pieces. They're kind of separated from each other. That the rook on a6 isn't doing much. The knight here is pretty, but of course it's not defending the king. The bishop's back on its original square. It doesn't have a whole lot of space to work. Queen comes out to g5. And now we have to take a look at things. White looks pretty good, pretty strong. King is pretty safe. Rook to a7 by Karpov. Now the rook comes to d8. This is, be honest with you guys, especially my students, when I'm playing the chess computers, when I allow things like this to happen, and if I do this on an over-the-board game or a chess.com game, this is the beginning of the end. The pieces are starting to swarm. See what's happening? I tell them that, my students that, I should say. You start to swarm. And the reason that this can happen now, as we notice, is white owns the center. There's no way for black to counterattack. Queen to e6. Now the back rank, black's back rank, is owned by white. With that rook sitting there, it's going to get more powerful here soon. f4. Kasparov wants a breakthrough on g6. He wants to get rid of that g6 pawn because that'll give him possible checkmates. Bishop a6. Got to get the queen released. Notice now 2 of black's pieces are on the wrong side of the board and cannot help him. There's f5 as we've expected. And the queen goes to e7. It's actually a pretty cool move. He's trying to trade off the queens, obviously. If he gets the queens off the board, the attack's going to fizzle. So Kasparov brings his queen back to d2. He's got to protect the rook. See the rook on d8. Got to watch him also. Good move on his part. Queen then comes to e5. Karpov knows he's in trouble. Queen to f2. Notice the diagonal attack. It's also going to let the queen come to the H file if it wants to. There's all kinds of possible things here. Computer likes rook to E7, but Karpov decided to move his queen to E7. And look at the numbers. Look at the computer. +5. Wow, that's just huge. That's at a grandmaster's level, that's a definite win for white. Queen to D4. Karpov's going to hang on a little bit longer. I don't blame him. I always tell my students, make them prove it. Well, it is a Grandmasters championship game. Anything could happen. E5. Knight to D5. Good move. Pawn takes G6. Check. F takes G6. And now rook takes C6. You see black's position is just totally falling apart at this point. There are too many points to defend. It just continues on and on. Queen. Whoops, knocked my king over. Now it looks like he just picked up a rook. Doesn't it? But that's not going to happen, is it? Because he's got this rook. So he exchanged rooks. And he gets a check. Karpov blocks it. Now, I would have thought rook takes A6. Yep, rook takes A6. That's the move. The queen comes down to D1. Now look at the bishop. Look at the bishop on B1. That's the important one. How are you going to save it and take care of the check? Of course, the queen has to come back. Queen to D2. Queen to F1. And Karpov had enough at this point. Now, look at the computer and what it's doing right now. We'll put this down for a second because we can play it out a little better. A little better. No, I'm sorry, not better. We can play it out a little bit. You can't allow the queen to come down to F7. So we'll take the computer's move. The computer is saying D3, so let's play that out a little bit. Now notice he's not going to grab the pawn here. I mean, let's just do that for fun. Some of you might like to do that. The problem is, if you take the pawn, notice the queen on the diagonal cannot get to the king easily. And I know a lot of students and people starting, and sometimes you see it in seasoned players. Oh, free pawn, we'll grab the free pawn. Okay, well, you can have the free pawn because it's checkmate that counts. You notice it's getting worse and worse. Computer says queen to B8, so let's do that. Rook to, whoops, I dropped that. We got to get it back where it was. I should have been playing this on the board properly. Okay, so rook to F6. Let's say you take it because you're greedy. Take it, and now you have a mate in 10. Now it's just a matter of moves. You're going to pick up this piece. Need I go any further, guys? Probably not. I'll just show it to you. You see, here was going to be the only way to stop it was to lose the queen. I know at this point you guys could do this. Hey, well, I hope this game was instructional and my little adding on to it more than what the book and the annotators and commentators put down. And it's been an instructive game. I hope you see the significance of the center, because it was through the control of the center that white was able to make the kingside attack, because black could not counterattack in the center. That's one of the things this game shows. So you guys take care, and as always, happy chess.